Welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series as we go through the 5th edition Underdark adventure Out of the Abyss with my intrepid party of players at my friendly local game store. So first of all, just want to say if you're a recurring watcher, thanks for watching and continuing to watch. If you're a new viewer, this is basically my notes. It's not a actual play. I sort of summarize what happens each week as I DM my group through Out of the Abyss. And I'll also mix in some other just sort of my thoughts as a DM, maybe rules clarifications or questions that came up and that sort of thing. First of all, you're probably noticing that the audio quality on this is a little bit different than normal. My regular wireless headset, the little USB plug-in jack thing just broke. So there's no way to charge it. It's got a little bit of a charge left in it, but I didn't want it to run out in the middle of doing a video. So I have this wired, I got a little wire here. It's kind of like Richard Garriott's little thing. We're British, so I guess I'm copying him. He's got that little wisp of hair that goes down there. So anyway, and this mic is picking up a little bit more of my computer noise, and my computer is louder than average, which is weird considering that I make videos, but I'm taking steps to upgrade to help alleviate some of that. So apologize for the noise or the audio quality. I hope it doesn't turn anybody off from watching the video. I also want to apologize for the delay. We had the store, the friendly local game store that we meet at, sort of closed unexpectedly for a few days while they were doing some reorganizing and other things. So we didn't meet for a week. We got part 2 of Out of the Abyss going, and then the next week we didn't meet, but we met the week after. So hopefully there won't be any more delays or anything like that. So that being said, let's get to viewer feedback. Viewer feedback. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Here is my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback. So let's check it out. You might also notice my voice is a little maybe deeper, richer, if you will, than normal. I get a little bit of a chest cold going on. My whole family's had it. So I do some radio work. I have a radio show every Saturday. And this rich Shane plays on the radio. It's very good for radio work, but I'd rather it go away. I'm tired of coughing. But anyway, okay, viewer feedback. So Vasily Chrisan perhaps said, welcome back. Vasily, thank you. Glad to be back. And he's referring to, we had a break between part 1 and part 2 of Out of the Abyss. And we did White Plume Mountain in the middle, but people were definitely waiting for Out of the Abyss to start again. Giovanni Micoli Tomei, I hope I'm saying that right, said, I watched all your notes when I started DMing this module and I got a lot easier. Thanks for that. Said, now my players are going to Minzo Baranzan already, so I hope it can help you. And so Giovanni has gotten ahead of where my group is at, with the break and everything in between. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Giovanni, as we progress. Rob Plummer said, great video as usual, Shane. Appreciate it, Rob. Thank you. I looked for you amongst the thousands of people at Gen Con, but didn't see you there. If I would have introduced myself. So here's the thing. I actually, as much as I love geek stuff, and D&D and RPGs and all that, I've never been to one of the big cons. I've never been to Gen Con. I've never been to Dragon Con. I've been to some local cons. And I've done, I help with some local RPG events around the Little Rock, Central Arkansas area. I got to be honest. I think it would be neat. I've heard stories of these cons my whole life. However, I saw a picture, and I'll try to find it to put up on the video. I saw the opening waiting line, the heaving mass of humanity waiting to get into this most recent Gen Con, and it actually kind of turned me off. I'm like, man, that is so many people. Wow, is that actually fun? So, but some people say once you get inside the event arena and everything is large enough that it's fine. But that initial picture, which people tweet out to impress everyone, look how many people are here. Actually, I was like, whoa, I'm not sure I'd want to be in the middle of that. And some other people feel the same way. So having said that, we have Arkansas RPG Con, which is just a one-day kind of fun thing coming up in mid-October here in Little Rock. I'm thinking about going to North Texas Con. I'm hearing great things about that. I'd like to get to Gamehole Con. I'd like to get to some of the other cons. I'd like to go to some of the cons that are just ultra RPG focused without turning into pop culture events. I'd kind of like to get away from that. Like, I have no personal interest in going to San Diego Comic-Con because it's not really about comics anymore. It's a big mainstream has gotten involved and they're using it to like kind of tell us what is cool. And I just have no desire to go do that. But having said that, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on Gen Con. I would have liked to have seen, I had John Peterson and Michael Whitwer on my radio show a few weeks back, and they were doing a history of Gen Con museum, like on Euler Field or something like that, and it looked amazing. I would have liked to have seen that. So anyway, Rob also said, I use those same sources as you do for prep, and he's talking about last video, and I'll do it again this video, some websites I'm using to help me with Gauntlgrym and other parts of this adventure. He said those authors have some awesome ideas. I agree. Rob, I'm definitely going to use, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but one of them has a great way of managing this huge amount of NPCs for the expedition that's about to happen. He says, my group is at the exit of the Underdark about to fight Elvara, then we proceed to White Plume Mountain. So Rob's group is actually at the end of part 1, and then they're going to go do White Plume Mountain as well. So, and Rob, you're a constant viewer, a constant commenter. Thanks for your support. Adam Lewis said, glad to see this back. Been a great help with my DM run through I'm currently doing, and that's why I do it, Adam. So I just kind of started doing these videos, kind of playing around with them, and I get not always the most views, but definitely the best engagement and feedback, and people saying thank you for doing these. So that's why I keep doing them. Okay, so Mike Fuller had a suggestion for campaign, and I'm talking about I'm wanting to find a good, I went over that, I'm not going to go deep into it, but last video I was talking about some of my players aren't on Facebook. One of my players, believe it or not, doesn't have a mobile phone. And I'm trying to find one good way to bring everybody together that is push, so it sends out alerts and all that stuff, and says, hey, come check out the new updates, or sends them directly to them. So he suggested basecamp.com. Says it's awesome for my Out of the Abyss campaign. Says it's free, has an app to ping people, message board, emails everyone, doc section for info, pics and character sheets, calendar, can easily add and drop people as needed. So I remember Basecamp from years ago. I'm sort of in the web development realm, and when Basecamp first came out, it was like, whoa, it was a lot of web developers and stuff we're talking about and pushing it. I did go check it out, Mike, and it looks great. The problem is the only free version I saw was if you're a teacher or a student, and so I wasn't. I mean, I can't. Obviously, one of the things I'd like to find in whatever solution I have is that it's either free or costs me very little. But I did go check it out, and other than that I was like, oh, I don't see it just straight across the board free version. It looked great, so thanks for that recommendation. Adam Lewis also said later, he said, I wanted to ask if you ever found a working balance to combat with a group that size. And as viewers of this series will know, my groups tend to run large. I think we're about 8 right now. And we've been larger, believe it or not. I think at one time for a few weeks we're at 12. And a lot of people, that's crazy. Again, I play on behalf of a store. I wouldn't do that necessarily if I was running out of the game out of my house, just with friends. But we make it work. It's rarely ever been a problem. He says he's currently running with 7-player group and completely blown away at just how much they can take down in a single turn. Dude, I hear you. I mean, like, wow, they are buzzsawing through this stuff. So here's what I told Adam on the comments online. I said, I feel like I'm getting better, but I'm still testing and tweaking and adjusting. I think adding hit points and adjusting hit points on the fly as the battle unfolds, and giving enemies default high initiative rolls on occasion works well. That's a thing that I come back to that a lot. Like, bump their hit points before the fight starts, And sometimes I'll just say, man, they're just having way too easy of a time with this opponent, so I may bump some hit points, or I may they may actually get defeated, and I'll let them stay up until they get one more action, and then the next time they get hit, I have them go down. I do things like that. Again, compensating that this stuff is written for 4 to 6 players, certain challenge level, got 7, 8, whatever, 9 people, so you got to kind of adjust it. It's not cheating to try to beat the players. It's trying to adjust the appropriate challenge level so that they're having fun and feeling like they're accomplishing something, and not just, walking through like they're, level 50 in a level 2, encounter or something like that. That actually will get boring after a while. And I think just defaulting, at least the first couple of rounds, giving the just default, give the enemies high initiative to ensure they get a chance to influence the battle. Say more enemies is also good, and that's one of the basic. Just drop some more enemies in there, but it can slow things down, and it can give you more stuff to keep up with. So just keep that in mind. And here's something that I found to be more and more of a benefit, and this should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. I think it's been one of my weak points that I keep learning to try to address as I keep learning to, learning to DM is an ongoing process. You're always learning. So I'll say, as I learn to DM, I recommend studying the enemies before the battle, especially if they're not just random, stormtrooper, generic enemy type things. Because sometimes they have spells and abilities and tactics that will completely jack up a party if used effectively. So even CR 2 and 3, maybe even CR 1 opponents or under, they might have group tactics or something like that. So really study. Don't assume that the battle. Say, oh, I haven't seen that. I haven't looked at that monster's stats in years, but I know how that monster works. You'll look later and go, oh, I should have done that. So there you go. Also, if their enemies are spellcasters, definitely. I mean, you get a stinking cloud or something out there, that can change stuff pretty quick. And then finally, Gauntlgrym said, I think Banishment needs to be concentrated on for 1 minute. After 1 minute, if the creature is not of the material plane, they stay gone. During that minute, if you drop or lose concentration, it reappears, so it is actually only banished after 1 minute. This is from Recall, as I don't have my books handy. And Gauntlgrym's correct. So the way the Banishment spell works is if you successfully cast Banishment on an enemy, if it is not native to the plane of existence that you're on when you cast Banishment, then after that full minute of concentration, it doesn't come back because it's gone. But if you lose concentration or drop concentration or whatever during that minute, it will come back, even though it's not native to this plane of existence. So if it's native to the plane of existence, then after 1 minute, no matter what, it comes back after being banished. So I think I originally said last video that, well, you cast Banishment on a fire elemental and it's not part of this plane of existence, so it's just gone. That's not true. You still have to go through the concentration up to a minute. So thanks, Gauntlgrym, for pointing that out. Okay, that's it for the viewer feedback. So I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and we will get back to the video, or the main recap from last week. Speaking of recaps, you may remember I've mentioned before that, and I can't take credit for this. I wish I could remember where I read it. It wasn't on Reddit, I'm pretty sure, but I read it somewhere about a way to encourage players to pay attention to what's happening in the game and to be aware of the overall story and what's going on. And that's where everybody, at the beginning of every session, you have everybody that was there last time roll a d20, and whoever rolls the lowest, you say, okay, what happened last time? And you let them recap what they remember. and then you kind of fill in, okay, and well, that would say that was good, but this also happened, and maybe prompt them at a couple of points. The point is, it does two things. One, it reminds everybody what happened last session, and it helps fill in the gaps for people who missed last session, but it also encourages all the players to try to kind of pay attention, because, you don't want to get called on and people are like, I just don't remember, because at that point, you're admitting that you're not living up to the sort of social compact of the game by remembering what's going on and all that. And I have had one player one time said, I don't know what happened last time. And like, okay, and then, and from that point on, boy, they took real good notes. So, and also you give XP. So to also reward them for doing it, if I give from 0 to 100 XP, based on how well, they recapped what happened. I usually assign out between 50 and 75. I have given 100 once or twice, because we have one player keeps notes on their phone during the whole game, and if they roll and they'll tell you everything that happened, and I'm like, okay, 100 XP. So anyway, I think it's a good method. I do think it's important for players, not just the DM, to remember what's going on. So it's part of that sort of unwritten social compact of gaming, in my opinion. So, okay, one thing that came up last time in this most recent session was one of the players, the cleric, asked about crafting healing potions, and we kind of stopped and spent a couple of minutes looking in the rules, but I said I'll get you some more information later, and I went and researched and all that. I think they just ended up buying healing potions because it's part of standard adventuring gear. But if you have players that want to craft healing potions, it can actually be a little bit confusing. And I went and researched this the best I could. I encourage you to do the same if you're interested in it. And especially if you want to double check my conclusions or you disagree with my conclusions. Where the confusion comes from is because healing potions are listed on the main adventuring gear table in the player's handbook. Some people say, well, then they're just mundane items and they can be crafted. That's not the case. I mean, they're clearly listed in the Dungeon Master's Guide as magic items. So they just happen to be common enough that, you can buy them. So the other thing is the herbalism kit in the player's handbook says you got to be proficient in this kit to make healing potions. So some people assume, and I can see where this assumption comes from, that if I have an herbalism kit, I can make a healing potion. Well, no, the herbalism kit, Jeremy Crawford, there's a Twitter thread with him where he addressed this. Just being proficient in the herbalism kit is not sufficient to make a healing potion, but it's a requirement of the larger process. If you're going to make a healing potion, you still have to use the crafting magic item rules that are in the Dungeon Master's Guide, not the crafting rules for mundane items that are in the player's handbook. This is, you got to go to the Dungeon Master's Guide, page 128 and 129, and use those rules. Okay. And you have to be proficient in an herbalism kit. Now, here's the other thing that's kind of weird. If you go by the Dungeon Master's Guide rules on page 128 and 129 for crafting magic items, it says let me see if I can find it here. I think a common magic item, if you go to 128 and 129, the creation cost for a common magic item is 100 gold pieces, and you have to be a 3rd level spellcaster and be able to expend a spell slot and all that stuff. But in the player's handbook, you can buy a potion of healing for 50 gold pieces. So it actually costs twice by the book to craft a healing potion as it does to buy it. That's kind of weird. I guess you could say, well, there's some people out there just pumping them out, and they've gotten so good at pumping them out that, they can sell them cheaper or whatever. But there's a possible explanation for this. And that is, if you go to page 135 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it talks about under rarity, at the last sentence in the rarity section, it says the value of a consumable item such as a potion or scroll is typically half the value of a permanent item of the same rarity. Now, if you apply that, then the cost is 50 gold pieces. But then everybody that's out there crafting healing potions is selling them at cost, right? And I guess that's all they do is just make healing potions. So they found a way. Several people get together and they're doing it, this high volume or something. I don't know. So I think what I'll do is I was let my party say, well, you can craft healing potions, but it's going to cost you, even though the Dungeon Master's Guide in page 129 says 100 gold pieces for a common magic item, it's 50, and then you divide the cost by 25, and that's how many days it takes you to craft a magic item. So in this case, if you were saying it's going to take you 100 gold pieces, then that's divided by 25 is 4. It takes you 4 days and 100 gold pieces to craft a potion of healing. If you do it at 50 gold pieces, which is what I'm going to let my players do, then it's 50 gold pieces in 2 days. Now, other people helping out can assist and reduce the time involved, but not the cost. Now, I did see some people online saying that they would allow their, you could house rule this. You could allow your players to craft it at 25 gold pieces. Really, my approach to this is magic healing potions are so common, you can buy them at really any market or whatever that has the standard adventuring gear from Player's Handbook. That being the case, really the only time you need to craft a healing potion is if you don't have access to that. For some reason, you can't just go to Walmart of D&D World and buy a healing potion. So that being the case, I would make it so that, really the only point of crafting your own is if you can't get to them. So, and there's more information out there on, there's more nuances to this. You can get potion of greater healing and this and that, and you go look in the Dungeon Master's Guide to magic items, and the rarity increases, which means the price goes up and how long it takes to make it. But I'm just talking about your standard potion of healing. It also says, it's interesting, in the Player's Handbook, the description states that it's a red liquid. And I've never thought of a potion of healing as being red. I've always thought of them as like white or blue, kind of a soothing, and maybe glowing just a little bit or something, or, having sort of a bright or a luminescent, maybe kind of appearance. I don't know if in D&D they've always been red, but I could see why they would say they're red now, because in the computer games that have been around forever and ever and ever, healing potions are almost always red. Like mana and your health, and as opposed to mana, which is blue or whatever. So maybe that's where that came from. So I'd like to hear people's thoughts. Do they know, has a healing potion in D&D always been red, or is that ever being clarified? I don't know, but I don't think of them as red myself. Okay, I'll mention those 3 helpful links again that we talked about during viewer feedback, and also that I highlighted last video. These are really helpful for Gauntlgrym in particular, but there's good resources on these sites for running Out of the Abyss as a whole. One is Elven Tower, Out of the Abyss Guide, Chapter 8, Gauntlgrym, and I'll put these links in the show notes on the show description, video description on YouTube. Power Score, Rage of Demons, A Guide to Out of the Abyss, and then Geek Rampage, Gauntlgrym, Out of the Abyss, Chapter 24. And that one specifically, Geek Rampage, has a really nice list of the NPC characters that can go on the expedition. Because as you'll see in this video, if they do all the diplomacy and everything with all the faction reps successfully, they end up with a huge amount, a really lot of NPCs. If you thought the first part of the Out of the Abyss, when they escaped Valkenvelve, they had a lot of NPCs, this blows that away. And there's some good advice for dealing with. I think it's Power Score, but we'll get more into this next video. One of these resources has an excellent approach to dealing, role-playing, and to dealing with this many NPCs. So this was, I just want to point out, this session in Gauntlgrym especially this session, but Gantholgrim in general is very RP heavy. And I feel personally that I need more experience in just pure RP heavy sessions. So I tried to make sure to include every player at different times, not just let the outspoken, more extroverted players. You know, I purposefully kind of spread it around and tried to give points at which everybody could be involved or people would be called upon. And then I did ask the players after this. I try not to do this all the time. Like, did y'all have fun? Because I think maybe that can be kind of annoying to the players even. I still believe the best rule of thumb is if the players keep showing up every week, they're having fun. I think that's the best way to get the feedback. But since this was a little bit different case, I said, hey, you know, did y'all enjoy it? And I explained, I said, you know, this isn't my strong point, and I just want to make sure that, you know, everybody enjoyed it. And they were like, yeah. So, I mean, I felt their responses were genuine. They weren't just being polite, but who knows? So, anyway, so I felt good about that. So, after the feast, at which the primordial had become unsettled because of the madness and had burped up a couple of fire elementals and all, and the party got to display its prowess by defeating the fire elementals. Bruenor, and this is by the book, calls them in after the feast. So they've had, at this point, I think 3 meetings with Bruenor. If I remember, when they first get there, they meet with him. Now, I think this is their second meeting. First get there, they meet with him. Then they go to the feast. And then after that, after the feast is over that night, he calls them in again to a more informal. It's still the king and all that, but it's not in his, you know, all the throne and the whole court around and all that stuff. He says, okay, here's what's really going on. And he has more of a, you know, down-to-earth discussion with them. And he basically said, and this is where he, you know, a servant, after the feast, a servant says, hey, come meet with the king again. And you go to a private chamber where the king is there waiting for them. And his previously friendly manner has turned kind of grave. So, and this is on page 125 in Out of the Abyss. And basically he just says, well, I'll just read the block. It says, I've told the allies you met tonight what you told me. And he's talking about the faction representatives. You know, he keeps pointing out these various faction representatives, which we will talk about in this video. I invited them here to learn what is happening, to share what we know, and to get their backing for what it is I propose. Ye have braved the Underdark and lived to tell the tale. Ye know better than anyone what it is we face, but we need to know more. The Zhentarim have a stake in a secret Underdark trading post called Mantle Dareth. If you can get them on our side, they'll guide you there, where you can meet with one of their agents, Gazrim Dulak. He can provide you with a map to Graven Hollow. It's a legendary place built by the stone giants long ago, said to contain all the knowledge of the depths. If there's answers to be found for what has happened, you might find them here. Or there. Might find them there. If you are willing to go back, that is. I don't propose to send you into the dark unprepared, and I hope you make an impression on those gathered here so they'll support our cause in your mission. From all I've seen and heard, there's no one better to do what needs to be done, so what say ye? And, you know, obviously, this is one of those things that Bruenor is like, I want you to go back into the Underdark. The players are free to say no, but if they do, you don't really have a game. You don't really have a campaign. I guess you could find other ways to suck them into the Underdark. But as written, if they're like, nah, we don't want to do that. Well, okay, so there's, you know, you don't want to put people on rails. But at the same time, there is a certain point where the players are kind of expected to go along with the plot hook. Right, just want to point that out. So he also, and I ad-libbed this, he clarified that the fire elementals that burped out and they had to fight were not a test. Because the players noticed that everybody was just kind of watching, like they had their hands on their weapons if they were needed, but they were just kind of watching the players. And so the players kind of thought maybe this was some kind of test that had been set up. And, you know, he said, no, this is not it wasn't a test. You know, the primordial, I can't remember, Majira, I think its name is, has been restless since the madness begins spreading in the Underdark, and similar events have happened. So he explains that. It's important to Bruenor that they don't think that he set them up. I mean, I guess he would have if he needed to, but, he didn't. So he asked players to meet with the faction representatives, explained his truce plans, which are basically gain the support of the faction reps. And this is very important. Put asterisks on this and underline it. They got to learn the location of Mantle Dareth. They've got to get guided there by the guy to get guided. They need the Zhentarim to lead them to Mantle Dareth, and from there to try to get access to the library at Graven Hollow. So the players didn't negotiate or ask for war. They said, okay, we'll do it. So this impressed Bruenor so much that he said, well, if you're successful, I'll give you titles, property, products from the Great Forge, et cetera, et cetera. And that's actually, if the players, by the book, if they're kind of reluctant or if they become very mercenary and start negotiating, then Bruin will offer these things, but his opinion of the players will lessen. He'll still be genial with them, but his opponent, his opinion of them will go down. And then he's just a little bit of background information here. He's like, okay, I need you to bring everybody on board, all these faction reps, and background material. One of the reasons he is looking to the adventurers to lead a new mission into the Underdark, apart from their experience, is they can serve as brokers among all the various parties with an interest in the mission. So he can't be seen to favor. It's much better for him as the king to set back and not negotiate directly with, let they have a middle party brokering everything. So politically, it's not just their experience and their ability to tackle threats. It's also important for him to have them as a broker, kind of chess piece on the board, which kings do. So, and from this point moving forward, the rest of the chapter is dealing with all of these faction representatives. Okay, so there are other things you can do in Gauntlgrym. There's other areas. There's the Great Forge. There's you spend most of your time in the Vault of Kings. There's also the Iron Tabernacle and the Great Forge and all that. I didn't spend a lot of time on that. You can if you want, and I encourage you to read up on it. I didn't. We play roughly 2.5 hours once a week. And, I didn't want to spend, it wasn't crucial to the story. So I just didn't spend a lot of time with that. Now, if the players had wanted to go exploring around, I wouldn't have stopped them, but it didn't come up. And I didn't personally encourage it. Or do any, hey, do you want to go look around? Kind of thing. Now, they do know, and one of the things they talk about in the book for Gauntlgrym, there's a lot of restless dead, basically spirits in Gauntlgrym, and they're not related necessarily to the madness. They're just there. And so for flavor, that came up a couple of times in the players' discussions with various people or faction reps or Bruenor or whatever. So once they're given their plan, hey, I need you to get the support of all these faction reps, but especially, and underline this, the Zhentarim, so that you can get access to Mantle Dareth. That's really, really, really important. The other stuff's important, but secondary to that in importance. So what I'd really recommend you do, and I'll summarize each of these faction reps, but I really encourage you to spend some time studying each of these faction entries, not only for information on the faction, but on the reps, what their motivations are, what they can offer, various role-playing aspects, that kind of thing. Really study it. Because if you don't have a handle on these faction reps, it will make or break this part of the game. I mean, I guess you could just, for time, you could have each faction rep automatically be on board and offer services. Fair enough, I guess. But if you want to play it as written, you really need to study these faction reps and what they want or don't want, or what kind of characters they like, and that sort of thing, and what they can offer. So, and I'm going to do that now. I'll kind of summarize briefly each faction and its representative. Representative. So I'd say it's also a good idea to be familiar with the social interaction rules before role-playing with the faction reps. That's in Chapter 8 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And Out of the Abyss even kind of mentions that and recommends that. That's where you go from somebody's like hostile or indifferent or friendly, and the related difficulty of checks in trying to persuade them and that sort of thing. You don't have to do it by the book, but I kind of did, especially in one instance that we directly did it that way. So the alignment of party members can also play a part, because there's a very wide spectrum of goals and types of factions that they'll be interacting with. Now, there are 5 factions they'll be meeting with: the Harpers, the Order of the Gauntlet, which I think is a relatively newer faction for Forgotten Realms. Not positive, but I believe that's the case. The Emerald Enclave, the Lord's Alliance, and the Zhentarim. Personally, I would save the Zhentarim for last, because that's the most important, and it kind of builds up that suspense. Can we get them to do what we want? But play it how you want. What I did personally, there's nothing in the book that says you have to do it this way, is I had 3 of the factions actually kind of reached out to make contact, and they slid envelopes under the doors of the various guest quarters to invite party members to come meet with them. And I did that either by alignment or by I studied the faction representative and kind of thought, well, what kind of party members would they want to meet with? For instance, the Harpers, this is kind of a no-brainer, wanted to meet with the Bard. The Emerald Enclave rep Marista Malkin is a neutral good shield dwarf scout, so she wanted to meet with the 2 dwarves in the party. The Order of the Gauntlet wanted to meet with the cleric. That's just kind of how I did it. And so they like party members that were invited, could take other party members with them. So basically we didn't just split the group, we split it 3 ways to meet with these various faction reps. Normally splitting the group, don't split the party is like, kind of a cardinal rule of role-playing in D&D. But for this fine, it was social interaction, and I certainly wasn't planning any combat, even though you could. There are ways to do combat in Gauntlgrym, random encounters with ghosts, depending on where they go, or you could have the primordial get all upset again and have creatures, or you could have assassins trying to foil the... There's a sidebar in here that says enemies... It's not a sidebar, it's a section that says enemies among us. That's on page 126 in Out of the Abyss, where you can have some intrigue and combat and assassins and doppelgangers and okay, but I didn't get into all that. You can, depending on how much time you want to spend there. But like I said, I'm just trying to move them through this, and let's get back into the Underdark. Okay, so the Harpers, the Order of the Gauntlet, and the Emerald Enclave all sent invitations. Very nice, paper, with a heraldry and scroll and all, please, at your convenience, come meet with, but really it's written in a way like, come now, kind of thing. These are diplomatic envoys of these faction reps. And we just totally ad-libbed this. So they were like, where are we meeting on that? And I said, well, they've all been furnished with temporary receiving chambers that are very nice, sort of like diplomatic suites, kind of thing. Now, the Emerald Enclave rep, Marista Moran, I think, I was just talking about her. Marista Malkin is actually a resident of Gauntlgrym and is actually a huge supporter and follower of King Bruenor. So they've got permanent receiving quarters, chambers that are more permanent, I guess. You can tell the difference between this is where I always have my thing and this is where I'm set up for right now. Even though they're all, have various levels of professionalism and luxury and that thing, as befitting their station. So, I had and I'll go through all this more detail here in a second. The Lord's Alliance rep met up with them in the evening at the Mead Hall, and we just kind of made that up. I mean, there's residences. They're in an area that has residences. So, there's taverns or something, but what we did was there's sort of a royal mead hall where people who associate with the court and these diplomatic envoys and stuff can go relax and booze up. And that's really we just invented that on the spot at the mead hall because they wanted to go drinking after they were done talking to the faction reps. And then the Zhentarim rep summoned all the non-good aligned players in the middle of the night. We're talking like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for their meeting, which I will, again, go over later. But the meeting with her was in her drawing room next to her, personal bed chambers. It wasn't like a official diplomatic receiving chambers or anything like that. So, party split into 3 groups, visited 3 factions that delivered the envelopes. So let's take a look at the different factions and their representatives. First of all, you have the Harpers. The Harpers are a clandestine network of spellcasters and spies priding themselves on being incorruptible defenders of the greater good and champions of the oppressed. They usually work alone, but they will come together in times of need. They know the demon lords seek to prey on the weak and corrupt the innocent. The Harpers feel this is the moment they've trained for, and their conscience now causes them to act. And they're the finest mages in their ranks are researching how to defeat the demon lords and their kind, and their scouts who occasionally chart and block off Underdark passages have brought back the terrifying news of what's going on with the demon lords in the Underdark. So they're like, yeah, this is bad. So the representative is Lord Zelron Roaringhorn, who is a lawful neutral male human wizard. His ideals are freedom, opportunity, civilization. His personality is proud, self-assured, fickle, and a spendthrift, and his potential resources are a shield guardian. And he's from a Waterdavian noble family. So basically, the Harpers basically stand ready to help. By the book, he's kind of like, yeah, we're aware of what's going on, and I just had him tell, okay, we know the Harpers are on this. We're not taking this lightly. Now, for personal, and I had, it was a good aligned bard, and I think a warlock went and met with the Harper representative. And, the Harper representative didn't really need any persuading. He's like, yeah, we know that this is a big deal, and we're working it as an organization. Now, the resource he can offer is a shield guardian. By the book, this guy's a gambler. And by the book, he says, if you could beat me in a chess match, I'll let you use, and he's got the shield guardian bodyguard hanging out with him. He's like, if you can beat me in a chess match, I'll let you take my shield guardian. So by the book, a chess match takes 1 hour. Now there's other, I had players go, well, I'm proficient in dragon chess or this or that or the other, or there's rules already covered in the player's handbook and the DM guide to how to do this. But by this book, by how Out of the Abyss is written, it says the chess match takes 1 hour, and the outcome is determined by a best-of-3 intelligence check contest. Zelron's experience gives him a +9 modifier to his intelligence checks. So, if you beat him, he will loan the Shield Guardian and its control amulet to the party until the expedition or adventure is over or whatever. And the Shield Guardian also has looks like a lightning bolt spell stored within it. Yeah. So my players accepted the challenge and lost handily because they had like a +1 on intelligence. He's got a +9. Now I did let both the bard and the warlock. So we ended up with 2 chess matches, and the second chess match did a little bit better, but they still lost. So, you know, and it does say in here that, you know, he may just go ahead and, out of the generosity of his heart, say, okay, take my shield guardian. But I just went, you know, nope, you know, fair's fair, you lost. Reason is they're already getting so many NPCs, and this group is already pretty OP on its own, just due to the size of the group and all of that. You know, I've actually had trouble challenging them towards the last of the first part of Out of the Abyss and in White Plume Mountain. So I'm like, you know, he's you know, takes the terms of the bet, the gamble, and you do not receive the shield guardian. But by the book, he can go ahead and say, okay, we'll just go ahead and take it, and I expect another chess match when you return. So if you want to do that, you can. Now, the Order of the Gauntlet is a dedicated, tightly knit group of holy minded crusaders, driven by a finely honed sense of justice and honor. Friendship and camaraderie are important to members of the order, and they share a trust normally reserved for siblings. The Underdark has always been a proving ground for candidates of the order, as well as frequent destination for veteran paladins, monks, and clerics looking to smite evil. It hasn't taken long for reports of new threats rising in the Underdark to reach the order. The Demon Lords embody the kind of evil the Order of the Gauntlet is sworn to destroy. So, again, this faction is already kind of predisposed to helping or being, you know, concerned by the Demon Lords. And the representative is Sir Laniver Strail, and he's a lawful good human fighter. And if for some reason your party wants to fight the Harper representative, Lord Zelaron Roaring Horn, you use the Archmage stats. And don't forget that he has the Shield Guardian as a bodyguard. So Sir Lannister Strail, you would use the Knight statistics for him if for some reason you get into a fight with him or your party does. And he also travels with a young but able squire, his female human guard. So you would use the guard stats name Ariel Vanis. So, Sir Laniver, his ideals are faith, devotion, justice, and duty. His personality is patient, determined, and witty. And his potential resources are Order of the Gauntlet veterans. A devout follower of Tyr, and a member of the Order of the Gauntlet, Sir Laniver is the most respected figure among the factions at Gauntlgrym. Little surprises him at this point in life. So, if most of the characters in the party are of good alignment, Sir Laniver is supportive of their mission and wants them to succeed. However, a party of mostly neutral or evil characters will need to work to gain his support. So, you know, it basically, if the party skews good, you really don't have to work to get a support. He'll just kind of offer it. If they're neutral or evil, then you'll want to use the social interaction rules or some other method to get him, because this guy's lawful good. You know, and they're all about smiting evil and all that. I would personally, it doesn't say this in the book, if the party's mostly neutral, I would have his position to be indifferent, and if it's mostly evil, I would have him be hostile, as far as, you know, his stance towards them as far as the social interaction rules go. But you know, that's just my thought. You can obviously do that however you want. So if he's of mind to provide aid, Sir Laniver pledges 5 human veterans of the Order to the party's mission, and it gives their names here and all that. He'll also offer a member of the party a +1 Warhammer, one of a handful of treasures held in trust by the Order. He prefers to bestow this weapon on a good or neutral line cleric or paladin. Feel free to swap this magic item with another magic item more useful to the adventurers. Now, I did, you know, we talked to the party, and nobody really wanted or needed the +1 Warhammer. They're doing pretty good on weapons and magic items and all that, so I didn't convert it to something else. So there you go. And we have 7 party members. I think that were there. Was it 7 or 8? I think 7 that were there. Anyway, we counted it out. I went around and polled by alignment, and they tipped good by 1. So they skewed good by 1 So they didn't have to work too hard to get Sir Laniver's support. Now, the Emerald Enclave. Members of the Emerald Enclave are spread far and wide across the Sword Coast in the north. They usually operate in isolation, relying on their own abilities and instincts to survive. Living deep in the wilderness demands great fortitude and the mastery of certain fighting and survival skills. Down in the Underdark, far from the wildlands, the Emerald Enclave must remain ever vigilant to avoid being blindsided by unnatural forces. Druids and scouts of the Emerald Enclave have recent... And there's more. I'm just summarizing. I go read all this. I'm just kind of give you some high points. I'm not reading you all of the background stuff here. Druids and scouts of the Emerald Enclave have recently witnessed the corruption spreading through the flora and fauna of the Underdark. In particular, they have tracked this corruption back to Zhentarim and Jubilex, with the demon lords both inflicting different parts of the subterranean... or infecting different parts of the subterranean realm. So they're not happy about that. And they also know that if they don't contain it in the Underdark, it will break out into the surface into Faerun. So they're already aware of the danger and inclined to help. The representative here is Marista Malkin. She's a neutral good shield dwarf scout. So very similar to Eldith, who in Eldith will be going with the party. Because she was such a boon companion in part 1. And also, like I said, we stat her up. In fact, one of my players is bumping her up to level 7 when we have drop-in players that are checking out the group or just going to be there once or twice or whatever. For whatever reason, we let them play Eldith. So, but Marista Malkin, neutral good, shield dwarf scout. Her ideals are loyalty, nature, and dwarven people. Personality is stern, stubborn, and insightful. And her potential resources are Emerald Enclave scouts and giant lizard mounts. That excited my players. They were down with that. So also, the reason they're giving you these ideals and their personality and all this stuff is for the social interaction rules. Because one of the things you can do is you can spend time with somebody and then you can roll to see if you can figure out with what one of their ideals are. And then you could play on one of her ideals is loyalty. Let me play on that to try to get her support, kind of thing. Or she's one of her ideals is the dwarven people, so let me play on that. And one of her ideals is the dwarven people, so she invited the 2 dwarves to come meet with her, right? So, all right, Marista Malkin is the only faction representative who resides in Gauntlgrym. Originally from the Silver Marches, she heard Bruenor's call to reclaim the glory of the ancient line of Dilzun and followed him to Gauntlgrym. Here, she balances her work with the Emerald Enclave and her loyalty to her people and their cause. So she serves King Bruenor as an advisor and both admires and respects him. Let's see. Now, she spends some of her time training elite scouts to reconnoiter the Underdark passages near the city. Now, this will play into role-playing with her. A few months ago, one of her scouts, a wood elf named Slottis Vadir, and there's 2 missing people for different faction representatives, so you want to make sure to keep them separate and understand who's who. But a wood elf named Slottis Vadir disappeared while on a mission in the Underdark. Hopeful that the characters might stumble upon Slottis and see him safely back to Gauntlgrym, Marista pledges a team of 3 shield dwarf scouts to accompany them, along with a giant lizard mount for each Enclave scout and each player character, and then it gives the names of the scouts and whatnot. So that's the Emerald Enclave, unless through role-playing they somehow screw it up, this is basically a gimme. Hey, I got a scout missing. If you'll help look for the scout, then I'll give you 3 veteran scouts from our group, and you can have some giant lizard mounts. I mean, who doesn't want giant lizard mounts, right? When you're going into the Underdark, so basically every party member gets a giant lizard scout or mount, giant lizard mount, and the 3 scouts that she sends with them also get lizard mounts. So for this party, I think it's 10 or 11 total giant lizards Not everybody that goes on the expedition gets a giant lizard. Not all the NPCs. But this is also, I think I mentioned this last video, the difference between part 1 and part 2 of Out of the Abyss is very stark. The first part, you have nothing. You're basically in your underwear. It's like survival horror for a while. And you're just scrabbling to survive, and you gradually get more acclimated and more able to survive and fend for yourself as time goes on. This time, you're going back into the Underdark in force. I mean, you got an expedition, all these NPCs that work for you, and you got giant lizard mounts, and you got food and supplies, and you got all your gear. So it's a completely different, very, very different, contrast. Between part 1 and part 2. So I think it's important to point that out and play on that during the game. Kind of make sure they feel that difference. Okay, so the last two factions are a little different. The Lord's Alliance is a political and economic coalition of cities spread throughout the North and the Sword Coast. And if your group went through the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the guy they rescue in the cave, I think his name is Sildar at the beginning, and then they go to Phandelver, or they go to Phandalin, and he becomes sort of the guy in charge, even though there's technically a mayor. That's Sildar, and he was a member of the Lord's Alliance. So anyway, the Lord's Alliance is a political and economic coalition of cities spread throughout the North and the Sword Coast. The Alliance owns its success to the effective cooperation and diplomacy between its members, who work to align their separate settlements towards a mutual purpose. This cooperation is easier during times of crisis, making the Lord's Alliance a powerful force when threats require a united front. The agents of the Lord's Alliance work to maintain the delicate network of information and diplomacy that sustains their order. Alert for anything that might threaten the Alliance's interest. Recent reports of unusual activity from the Underdark might mark one such threat. So, in general, the Lord's Alliance would not want to ignore this threat. It says the possibility that the demon lords of the Abyss are active in the Underdark is a threat to the Lord's Alliance. Is a threat the Lord's Alliance can't ignore. Now, the representative, though, is a little different. This is Lord Aravian Hond. He's a lawful, neutral, half-elf noble. His ideals are order, society, peace, and stability. And his personality is charming, sly, and worldly. And his potential resources are Lord's Alliance guards and spies. Now, the representative of the Lord's Alliance is a noble of Tetherian and Moon Elf heritage. He's a lawful, neutral, half-elf noble. Although he hails from Waterdeep, Lord Aravian often travels to other Alliance settlements. He's a charming and sly courtier, able to immediately size up any social situation, but his fondness for socializing often distracts him from what's important. As a result, Aravian has heard relatively little of the recent events in the Underdark, and is initially unconvinced of the importance of the party's mission. So, the way I did that, I set him at Chapter 8, Dungeon Master's Guide, Social Interaction Rules. I set him at indifferent. Remember, there's hostile, indifferent, friendly. So I put him in indifferent. Because he's like, what? He doesn't know much about it. And he's not convinced. Everyone's like, man, everyone's talking about all this craziness. I mean, something's up, but is it really as serious as everyone is saying? So if they can convince him otherwise, Lord Aravian arranges for some agents of the Lord's Alliance to join the expedition. 5 dwarf guards from the Alliance city of Mirabar, and 3 human spies from the Alliance city of Yartar. So, also, Aravian knows that the Lord's Alliance has a deep cover operative in the Underdark, Kalessa Draga. A high elf from Silvery Moon was sent to spy on the Drow over a year ago. Aravian knows that Kalessa uses magic to disguise herself as a dark elf and warns the characters not to attack any drow they encounter until they can confirm the target isn't Kalessa in disguise. The Lord's Alliance lost contact with Kalessa months ago, so Aravian doesn't even know where she is. And should he come under attack, you use the noble statistics. And he travels with 3 servants, strong-hearted halfling commoners, and 3 well-paid human guards. So you would use 3 commoners and 3 guards to protect him. Marista Malkin, if she comes under attack, use the scout statistics in the monster manual to represent her. So, so here's what I did with him. They were in the mead hall that night, that evening, drinking and kind of catching up and this and that and the other. And he kind of just shows up. He just wanted to drink and socialize, and he kind of wanted to he's like, yeah, I thought I'd find y'all here. So he kind of wanted to introduce himself and, talk further with them. But, he made it real clear that it was obvious he's more interested in using the occasion of being summoned here to kind of drink and socialize and all that at the court of King Bruenor than he is actually convinced of the threat, and seemed to be having a good time. He's talking with them, joking around with other people, knocking a few back. And the group talked with him quite a while, trying to change his mind. And then I let him role play this for a while, and then I called for a charisma roll, which is one of the things you can do in the book, the social interaction rules in chapter 8. And the bard rolled I think they said, can we assist the bard? Because several other people were also trying to convince. And I said, in this case, because you may remember, I'm very careful on when I allow assist and when not, because it can be abused pretty easily to constantly give people advantage. But in this case, that makes sense. And he rolled a 30 once everything was said and done. And so the bard, they talked with him for a while, and then the bard made a charisma roll, and he rolled a 30. And I had Lord Aravian Han's demeanor kind of got more serious, and he's kind of thinking. And he's like, so you say all this is true, huh? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, huh. He seems kind of troubled. And he said, I need to ponder these things. And he left. And so that's how the initial interaction with him went. So I kind of role-played that sooner or later it became obvious that the mead hall people kind of wanted to close up. But because they were honored guests, they were kind of waiting on them to leave. They didn't want to just say go. So they kind of okay, and they went back to their quarters and all that, and went to bed for the night. Now, what I had was in the middle of the night. I think we said it was like 2 or 3 in the morning or something. I don't know. Even though it's always dark in the Underdark, they set the lighting, and I even ad-libbed that they have bells or signals in the distance that kind of ring and let people know what time it is. And I had about 2 or 3 in the morning, the 3 non-good aligned party members had a knock on the door, and they were summoned. And some of this I ad-libbed, okay, but they were summoned by sort of black-clad Zhentarim agents, sort of junior members, I guess if you will, they have the Zhentarim crest or whatever. They were summoned, said, Lady Davra wishes to speak with you. And so Lady Davra, I'll tell you a little bit about the Zhentarim. They went, it was obvious that they weren't exactly sneaking, but they weren't exactly taking the most direct route either. So the Zhentarim, and the Zhentarim have changed a little bit over the years. They used to be straight out evil, like the Mafia, basically. But the Forgotten Realms, they changed a little bit. They're still not Boy Scouts by any means, but they've changed a little bit over the years. But members of the shadowy Black Network consider themselves part of an extended family and rely on the larger organization for resources and security. The Zhentarim recognizes and rewards ambition, granting its members autonomy to pursue their own interests and gain some measure of personal power and influence. In this way, the organization is a meritocracy. The Zhentarim welcomes dangerous times as opportunities. When a merchant caravan needs an escort, a noble needs bodyguards, or a city needs trained soldiers, the Zhentarim provides the best trained fighting forces money can buy. Zhentarim agents traveling to and from Mantle Dareth. Remember, Mantle Dareth is very important at this part of the adventure. Have recently passed on information and rumors concerning demonic activity in the Underdark. The organization's members have yet to realize the full extent of the threat, as corruption and madness have already infiltrated their secret outposts since the initial reports. See Chapter 9. That's what's coming next. So Mantle Dareth is already... corruption and madness have already infiltrated Mantle Dareth, which we'll find out more later. However, even the most cautious member of the Zhentarim knows the demons at large in the world are bad for business. There's more background information here, which I encourage you to read and become familiar with. But at this point, the organization is willing to commit to stop the demon lords from breaching the surface, knowing that such a fate would destroy the Zhentarim's plans for control of Faerun. Now, the representative is Davra Jasser. She's a lawful evil human assassin. Her ideals are order, discipline, and ambition. Her personality is driven, focused, and ruthless, and the potential resources she offers are Zhentarim thugs. Graceful and elegant as a blade, Davra Jasser ostensibly recruits promising new talent for the Zhentarim, but she also deals with internal problems, etc., etc., etc. The pragmatic Davra values order and discipline as well as drive and ambition, and she embodies all those traits. So, the Zhentarim's intelligence gathering resources and access to an established Underdark outpost give the organization the strongest hands of any of the factions, and she knows that. Access to Mantle Dareth is key to the plan, and although she ultimately won't withhold that access from the adventurers, she intends to make sure it's not given away for free. Davra deals with the adventurers directly and privately if possible. So they meet with, I had them, they kind of, and I ad-libbed all this. They were in kind of her drawing room, and they get there, and the three sort of junior members that brought them kind of fade to the walls to be, very non-intrusive, but at the same time, their presence is very clear. So if something, I guess, goes awry, they're there. Now, I made them up. They're not necessarily in the book. I just kind of made that up. But Davra herself is an assassin, so there's actual there's a stat block evidently for assassin. And in addition to her weapon, she carries Dust of Disappearance and wears goggles of night while roaming the dark halls of Gauntlgrym. So now I had a little bit of frustration with my players because once the negotiation started, she was like, so, what can the Zhentarim do for you? And, my players are kind of like, and so she's like, so, what do you require? Is there any assistance the Zhentarim can offer? And the three players really fumbled it. I mean, not fumbled by rolling a 1, but they didn't know what to ask for. They didn't know. And so I kind of out of character timed out, and I was like, okay, so what did King Bruenor tell you? And they're like, and so I went back and reread the thing from King Bruenor where he's like, the Zhentarim are very important, and we got to get access to Mantle Dareth, and it's very important. And I was a little frustrated because, I felt like that I had made that point. And it's very important to the story. Now, as a good DM, if Mantle Dareth, they don't get access to Mantle, you'll come up with some other way to get the plot moving forward. But the main plot hook at this point, as written, is get to the Zhentarim, gain their support in getting you access to Mantle Dareth, so that you can get further access to Graven Hollow, the great library of, I think, the Stone Giants or something. So that, because if there's anywhere in the Underdark that you might get information about what's going on, it would be a Graven Hollow. But Mantle Dareth is required to get there, as written. So I was a little bit like, really, you don't... But anyway, so I read it to them again. They're like, okay. And so they... because Bruenor had clearly told them the most crucial thing was to get access to Mantle Dareth via the Zhentarim. So when you're working with your players, I really recommend stressing that, because I felt like I stressed it. Maybe I didn't. So the suggested thing in the book, which is what I went with, was she asks for a full share of any treasure the characters claim during their next incursion in the Underdark, and a full reporting to her of all information given to Bruenor or other faction leaders. Now, if one of the characters is a member of the Zhentarim, Davra tries to make the deal for information with that character alone. Now, it's possible, based on how you're playing the game, or this adventure, or your campaign in the Forgotten Realms or whatever, some of your players may be members of these factions. And if so, I mean, it definitely makes sense for the factions to meet with them. Okay, I didn't mention that before, I should have, but I don't really mess with that in my campaign. But you might. So, but she asks for a full share of any treasure the Underdark's claim, the characters claim during their next incursion in the Underdark, and they want a full reporting, or she wants a full reporting. Anything that's told to King Bruenor or any of the other faction leaders, she wants to know. And the players agreed to that. So they came to an agreement. And so what happens is Davra, in addition to saying, I'll have somebody guide you to the hidden trading post of Mantle Dareth, she also provides Zhentarim mercenaries for the expedition. These 8 human thugs proudly wear the crest of the Black Network on their armor. So the players accepted that as well, and their names of the thugs and everything are in here. So they're going to get access to Mantle Dareth, and I kind of ad-libbed that she's like, I'm not going to tell you which one of my men know the way to Mantle Dareth, but it's more than one, but it's not all of them. And that's her way of, like, you better protect my guys, and I'm not going to tell you who it is, and it's more than one. So that gives, she's trying to give the players major incentive to protect her men. Okay, so they go back, and the next morning, the players actually found kind of a loophole in that they didn't tell it to her, obviously, but they were kind of talking out of character. And they're like, she said that we tell King Bruenor or one of the other faction leaders. She didn't say, tell me everything you know. So they can hold back something from everybody, and they're not breaking the terms of her deal. So they kind of figured that out on their own. I hadn't even thought of that. So the next morning, all the players kind of huddle up in one of the guest quarters, because they all have their own individual guest quarters, and they're talking about all the factions and this and that, and they get updated on what happened with the Zhentarim. And they're talking and sharing information and all of that, and there's a knock on the door, and it's the Lord's Alliance rep, Lord Aravian Hond. And he's like, I want to offer my support. I want to offer the support of the Lord's Alliance. They obviously got through to him, and he's pondered this all night. He's like, I thought about this all night. This could be quite bad. So he says, you'll have the support of the Lord's Alliance. So they get 5 dwarf guards from the Alliance city of Mirabar, and they also get 3 human spies from the Alliance city of Yartar, or whatever. And he also tells them at that time about the deep cover operative, the high elf from Silvery Moon that has been using magic to disguise herself as a drow and has, they don't know where she's at. So please don't attack any drow until you make sure it's not our drow or our spy, our high elf spy. And the players were like, well, how do we know it'll be her? And I'm like, and the book is kind of like, so it doesn't say anything. So we came up with this passphrase called, it said, the reddest of roses grows in Silvery Moon, because she's from Silvery Moon. Or is it a he? No, it's a her. Really anything involving Silvery Moon, because that's where she's from, would probably work. But the official phrase is, the reddest of roses grows in Silvery Moon. And we just invented that on the spot. Now, I want to take this time to highlight, back in the 80s when I was in high school, there was this guy, David Dunn, who was one of the coolest dudes I ever met. I've lost touch with him for decades now. But I loved playing D&D with him, and I thought he was so smart, such a cool dude. I remember we were playing one time, and I only played with him a few times. It was a whole group of guys and gals that were a little bit older than I was. But they had they were talking about, there was some kind of passcode or passphrase or something that it was like, I don't know if it was a magic item or the way to open a door or something like that. And they said, how do we activate this? And David said, I'm not going to tell you, but there is an actual passphrase, and if you ever guess it, then I'll let you have whatever it is. And the passphrase turned out to be Ronald Reagan on the flip side of a Motown record. And I've always remembered that, and I thought it was super cool. And I mean, yeah, technically it's like that's a real passphrase, but what are the chances that somebody's going to guess that? I've never forgotten that, Ronald Reagan on the flip side of a Motown record. And the reason I played it, because I jokingly, when they asked what the passphrase is, I thought for a second, I went, Ronald Reagan on the flip side of a Motown record. And they were like, so they're like, assuming that we could time travel and go across dimensions, maybe that would mean something to us. Okay, so there's a final meeting with King Bruenor before the expedition begins. And this chapter ends. In some page 129, it says, depending on how the negotiations go, the characters are either an advance force to scout and soften up opposition in the Underdark, while looking for valuable strategic information, or a diversionary expedition meant to buy time for the surface world to organize a stronger response. I would say they're the former, because they basically got all the resources. Faction representatives not impressed by the adventurer's cause might return to their factions, convinced characters have little chance of succeeding or surviving. The others are confident that the characters can live up to the promise they demonstrated in escaping from the drow in the Underdark. And in this, and I mean, your campaign might go different, but in this case, things are good. All lights are green. King Bruenor convenes a final gathering of his inner circle of advisors and adventurers, giving the characters his thanks for their commitment to fight against the demon lords. Y'all know the dangers and threats of the world below, and you have bought that knowledge with bravery and guile. Even more, in diplomacy have you forged the first of the connections that will see the North prepared for what might come. If we survive the coming onslaught, we'll have ye to thank, and no dwarf of Gauntlgrym will soon forget it. You all have the courage and conviction of heroes. I'll even say you remind me of other heroes I've known from a previous life. And of course, he's Bruenor traveled with Dritz and Wolfgar and Regis, the halfling, and all that. So, characters have at least a few days before they must venture into the Underdark. Time they can spend to shape their plans, gather resources, prepare for the threats that stand ahead of them. When they are ready to brave the Underdark once again, they can start the long and dangerous journey to Gantholgrim. See Chapter 9. And there's, in the back of the chapter, there are printouts for these various NPCs that they can get. Guards and spies and scouts and whatnot. Shield Guardian, whatever. Giant Riding Lizard. You could print those out. There's multiple ways to handle these NPCs that we'll talk about next video, but one of the things, you can actually print these out, cut them up and hand them to the players and let them, you control this and you control that. And now, I'm not planning to do it that way, but that's one of the ways you can do it, and we'll talk about that more next video. And then after that, it's into Gantholgrim. We'll also, next video, we'll give a count of the actual NPC list. There's a lot, but you can go to, again, follow the link to Geek Rampage Gauntlgrym. It'll be in the video notes, and it's got a very nice list of all the NPCs by name and everything. So that's it for this recap. I really encourage you to go through and read through all that faction rep stuff yourself. There's more information there than I gave here, but that gives you a general sense of what's supposed to happen. Another thing I did, the first video, or the first session that we were in Gantholgrim, the player that has Whelm was gone, but he was back for this session, so I had some role-playing NPC reactions to Whelm. And Whelm is just ecstatic to be in Gantholgrim, surrounded by dwarves. I mean, he's just like in sentient weapon heaven, basically. And King Bruenor and the Emerald Enclave rep and others were like, "Is that Whelm?" And they were really impressed. So had a little fun with that. But we will catch you next time on Shane Plays. Please leave a comment and a thumbs up if you would. That helps me out tremendously. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. But regardless, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Shane Plays.